Okay, I am going to open this webinar now and welcome everybody to this webinar on digital skills, literacies and citizenship. I'm Sonia Livingstone. I'm a professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science. And before we begin, I'll just check to everyone who's attending. If you can't hear us, you might need to join by audio on the bottom left hand of your screen. And please note that this webinar is being recorded for later uploading, and I think it's also being live streamed to Facebook. So here in the Department of Media and Communications at LSE, we have a long-standing interest in questions of media literacy, now sometimes called digital literacy or digital skills, all as part of our research agenda on how changes in media and communication shape and are shaped by social, cultural, political, economic and historical developments. And we have a concern with inequalities, discrimination, representation, voice, violence, a whole host of issues that arise in an unevenly media-saturated society. So among our various projects here, I lead the theory work package of a European Commission Horizon 2020 funded network called CORE. And CORE stands for Children Online Research and Evidence. And it's a coordination and support action running from 2020 to 2022, which means it's creating a pan-European knowledge platform on the experiences of children and young people in digital communication spaces. And it has partners from 9 countries, and it's led by the Helsper Institute in Hamburg. So today's webinar is part of this work, and it's also organized with our second Horizon 2020 our second project, which is called Y Skills or Youth Skills. So over the last decade, we've witnessed major transformations in children and young people's access to and immersion in the digital environment. And while there's been considerable attention to the risks and the safety issues that arise, there's still less attention to the positive ways in which society hopes children will and can engage as actors in a digital world. So how do we imagine young people's role as digital citizens? What do we expect them to know and understand about digital platforms? Is society really ready for their skilled and critical engagement? Or when we provide digital skills training and media literacy education, is society being primarily defensive to ensure children can cope with the problems of the digital environment? So in this webinar, we're going to debate the theories and concepts that underpin these questions, drawing on expertise relating to young people's digital skills, their media and information literacies, and their prospects for digital citizenship. Our 4 speakers for today are internationally known for their contribution to this field, and they come from different disciplinary backgrounds. So we're keen to discover where there might be scope for debate as well as agreement. And while our focus is on theories and concepts, we of course are also interested in practice. Concepts only make sense in context, and the context in which digital skills and literacies are discussed are also diverse. And as I'm sure our speakers will say, we all learn and deepen our theory through seeing how ideas apply in practice, even if the result is to send us back to the drawing board. So I'm going to introduce the speakers in the order that I've asked them to speak, and begin with Tessa Jolls, who is president of the Center for Media Literacy in Los Angeles. So thank you, Tessa, for getting up so early today. Tessa was awarded the Fulbright NATO Security Studies Award with a focus on media literacy as a strategic defense priority for NATO. She's the 2015 recipient of the Global Media and Information Literacy Award in recognition of her work in media and information literacy and intercultural dialogue from the UNESCO-initiated Global Alliance for Partnership on Media and Information Literacy in cooperation with the UN Alliance of Civilizations. Next, we have Alton Grizzle. Dr. Alton Grizzle works at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris as a program specialist in media and communication and he manages UNESCO's Global Actions on Media and Information Literacy, or MIL. Alton has a diverse education and experience in fields of education, management, information systems, and media and communication. And he spearheaded many projects and co-authored books and articles relating to media and information literacy, gender and media development, and communication for development. Dr. Sandra Cortesi is a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, and she's the director of the Youth and Media program there, where she coordinates youth and media policy, research and educational initiatives, and works closely with researchers and with young people as they develop innovative ways to approach social challenges in a digital world. She focuses on topics such as inequitable access, information quality, risks to safety and privacy, skills and digital literacy, and I think the subject of her most recent report, spaces for participation, civic engagement, and innovation. And fourth, Professor Ellen Helsper works in the Department of Media and Communications at the LSE and specializes in studying how the distribution of digital skills and literacies leads to inequalities in the positive and negative outcomes that individuals achieve from information and communication technologies and the impact of social media in everyday life. She leads the international project From Digital Skills to Tangible Outcomes and collaborates with the European Commission's project on digital competences, or DigComp, and with the UN and the ITU's ICT Development Index. So I've invited each of them to speak for about 5 minutes, and I have some follow-up questions for them. And in the meantime, everyone is invited to pose questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. And I can see we have a very media literate audience because they're already beginning to post these questions. And Willem Joris, as our discussant, will put these questions to the speakers later. So Dr. Willem Joris is a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute for Media Studies at KU Leuven, and he's researched the news coverage of the EU crisis, the impact it has on citizens' perceptions, and coverage of EU migration. And he's the project manager of Y Skills, working to maximize long-term positive impact of ICT use on the social, physical, psychological, and cognitive well-being of children and young people. So I've asked each speaker, how do they define, as it were, the key concept they wish to advocate for? What do they see as the strengths of their particular definition? And then in my mind, and I'm sure in theirs, what question or problem do they see this concept of media literacy, digital skills, digital citizenship? What question or problem is it an answer to? Why is it so important? And what would matter if we weren't all talking about this? Or indeed, why should we talk about it more? And I'm also listening out as they talk for the theories and concepts or traditions that they draw on to frame their work. And that might be where we see some scope for debate, as well as in the relation between theory and practice. So, Tessa, I think Maria Stolova, who's kindly behind the scenes arranging everything, is going to share your slides. And I'm sorry to say, Tessa, I'm going to begin my timer. So thank you so much.
All right, I'm hoping you can hear me now.
Yep, it's all good.
Okay, excellent. Well, I really welcome this opportunity to discuss the conceptual aspects of media literacy, and then certainly I want to relate those to practice and how the concepts really inform the practice, and how they not only inform the practice, but they also form the basis for evaluation. And I think that's a really, really key point, because we need to evaluate the effectiveness of our work and be able to demonstrate to policymakers that it truly works toward the objectives. And so we have to have a conceptual base to be able to do that. So I've outlined a few ideas here. One is that media literacy has, to me, three big aspects to it. One is that it's a global movement that really has kind of risen up through the grassroots and through the efforts of many teachers through the years. And you find it in pockets of societies all over the world. So it's amazing how there is this strong passion behind media literacy and being able to provide media literacy for all citizens of every country. Secondly, it's a field. It has a very strong academic base. It has research attached to it that's growing and growing more all the time. And so as a field, we have a couple of big research priorities. One would be what I say is understanding the media environment and how it impacts people and how people engage with the media. So things like bots and so on are one example of the kind of research that's needed. You know, how do we inform people about that? How do they interact with the media? And then the second big aspect of research that's needed gets at the practice of media literacy. How do we educate 1 billion or more people about media literacy? It's a huge challenge. And finally, media literacy is a pedagogy. It has a pedagogy associated with it. And we all know that teaching something is different than practicing something, and that we need certain pedagogies to be able to really educate people and provide the foundational understanding of media literacy that's needed globally. All right, for my second slide then, I wanted to explain that media literacy rests on a process of inquiry. It's about asking questions. It's not directive, instead exploration. And it's exploring media as a global symbolic system. And that global symbolic system represents the world to us, but we also represent ourselves to the world. And so we have a very active role with media, and particularly with social media today. And we like to say that in understanding the word representation or represented, that media represents the world, and we represent ourselves to others. And that's a very important idea, because we're studying representation. We're not studying necessarily the media itself. We're studying how media represents. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Now, as part of the pedagogy for media literacy, but also for the conceptual underpinnings of media literacy, through the years, the core concepts of media literacy have been developed. They were developed primarily through the work of Len Masterman and also of a group of Canadian educators. And I consider these concepts kind of the laws of gravity for media and how media operate as a global symbolic system. And so the first concept is all media messages are constructed. Someone made them. There's human agency, whether it's an algorithm or whether it's a video. Secondly, media messages are constructed using a creative language with its own rules. And here we mean that, for example, music has its own rules. And music is very important oftentimes with media in telling us how to feel. So we need to understand the language of media and how it works and how it comes together. The third concept, different people experience the same media messages differently. Here we learn to really respect the fact that other people are going to understand very differently from ourselves. And we have to be empathetic We really need to understand and learn from each other. And I think that's a very important part of the practice of media literacy. Fourth, media have embedded values and points of view. And here we're looking at the bias that's always associated with media. And in the media literacy field, we say everything has bias. And so our job is to find the bias. What is it? And fifth, most media messages are organized to gain profit and or power. And here we look at the purpose behind media and the fact that commercial media is driven by the profit motive. How does that affect the content of media and how we engage with the media? And certainly power motives, we know, are everywhere. And in a world where young people are being recruited for jihadism and so on, there we have a very potent power motivation. So again, we need to understand that. So this, I hope, gives kind of a conceptual overview, and then certainly we want to make the connections to the practice and the evaluation.
Thank you so much, Tessa. That was a very intense 5 minutes of many of the concepts and approaches that I feel I was kind of brought up with intellectually. So I really appreciated that, and the sense of the media literacy as a movement, and a critical movement and an engaged movement, as it were, not, as people like to say, something dry on the library shelves. Not that library shelves are so dry. So I'm now going to turn to Alton Grizzle, who has, as it were, taken media literacy and put information in the middle. And I think that makes for something of a difference. And I look forward to hearing all about it. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and maybe good morning for those who are in other parts of the world. Thank you. Let me first thank Professor Livingston, Sonia, and her colleagues at the London School of Economics for inviting UNESCO to this important dialogue. The second point before I jump in my presentation, to say that I agree with almost all of what Tessa Jolls has just shared, and I will simply be adding different dimensions and perspectives to what was shared earlier. Tessa is also a partner of UNESCO, and she's the regional representative of the UNESCO-led MIL Alliance, the Global Alliance for Partnerships on Media and Information Literacy. So thank you again. We're in a multimodal information, media, digital, and technological and communication landscape. And what do we have with that? We have social interactions that are mediated by the written text, by images, by graphics, by moving images, by digital software systems, including algorithms and artificial intelligence. And as if that wasn't enough, this is all wrapped up in meaning making, being conveyed through different languages and cultures and social background and experiences. So what we have before us is a sort of ecology, and if the first slide can be brought up, is an ecology of media and information. It's an ecology of the information, media, and technological landscape. And in that ecology, there is some complexity, there is some unpacking and many different concepts, as you can see on the screen, related to literacy, where there's library literacy, information literacy, advertising, news, computer, social media, you name it. Now, recently, we're talking about AI literacy and privacy literacy. But when we come right down to it, these are very much the same concept that we're talking about. Defining a single concept then, or articulating a single definition that can encapsulate the competencies that people need in the 21st century becomes invariably complex. And the standpoint from UNESCO is that no one definition can sufficiently capture the multimodal mediated learning that we're in. And so thus our approach in UNESCO is to focus not so much on a one sentence or two sentences definition, but to concentrate on what should a media and information literate person be able to do. And Tessa Jolls shared some of that earlier, and also Professor Livingstone in her introduction. For UNESCO, MIL includes an integrated set of information, media, and digital/technological competencies. And thus, a media and information literacy person should be able to better search and critically evaluate information, to use information, and to contribute to information and media content wisely. They need competencies to purposefully and creatively use technology, to know about how to defend their rights online. What are their rights online and how to defend their rights online, whether it's their privacy rights online, whether their freedom to connect or disconnect, and to understand the ethical issues surrounding access to information and use of information as it relates to freedom of expression, access to information, and promoting equality and peace. Now, of course, there are different perspectives to this. And you have heard it earlier from my colleague Tessa, all right? There are different perspectives looking at this from the connection of information literacy as the overall container, or digital literacy as the overall container of all these literacies, or media literacy as the overall container, umbrella for all these other notions of literacy. What UNESCO is trying to do is to harmonize the dialogue and to bring the different stakeholders together, realizing that this is how we'll achieve impact in the long run. Media and information literacy then addresses many social opportunities and challenges. The thing is that sometimes we as experts and development practitioners, we're too good at focusing on the challenges of the information, media, and technological landscape. And Professor Livingstone highlighted that in her introduction, that we need to balance that and focus more on what people, not just on what people should not do in the new information and media and technological landscape, but balance that by telling them what they can do and should do to capitalize on the flood of opportunities that communication systems bring. First and foremost, media and information literacy is literacy. That is to say that MIL responds to an expanded definition of literacy that UNESCO promotes. It's not a choice between basic literacy and media and information literacy. They're one and integrated and inseparable. Thus, MIL aids quality education, or quality education for all. We need media and information literacy for all as a part of quality education for all. It supports access to information, freedom of expression, dialogue, promoting peace, and tackling some of the challenges and opportunities that we face in today's society. Disinformation and misinformation is one of the biggest ones right now that is before us. MIL is needed for different reasons. All right, one, technology, media, information has become ubiquitous. We cannot avoid it. It's a part of our daily life. You know, experts are talking about the Internet of Things. Secondly, and my colleague Tessa identified that media and information sources and providers, they're instrumental in shaping our perceptions, our beliefs, and our attitude. There's an increase in user-generated content. We no longer have only consumers of information and media content, but also producers. So we have prosumers, you know, the use of the virtual spaces and citizens journalism. And so this is another reason why media and information is important. Media and information providers are central to democracy and governance and sustainable development. MIL helps people to be able to effectively participate in governance processes and democratic processes and in sustainable development processes. It also helps to deal with how do we ensure that people can advocate for quality information, quality media, and better internet experiences. MIL offer some of those competencies. There are many theories and concepts that could be applied to media and information literacy, all right? Many theories and concepts that could be applied to media and information literacy. MIL was media and information literacy, or media literacy, information literacy is interdisciplinary in nature. Thus, collectively, MIL was born out of media and communication studies, information and library studies, technological studies in the context of information and knowledge societies. One can therefore draw on hundreds of different theories, whether it's in the cultural studies tradition, the political economy tradition, theories, or information culture, information seeking behavior. And there are many theories that we know about as experts work in the field: the user gratification theory, media effects, agenda setting, cognitive theory, social learning, and complexity theory, and we could go on. From our standpoint and from my personal standpoint, I don't have disagreements with many of these theories, but I share the sentiments of many scholars who argue that sometimes some theories focus too much on the search for the negative, or an exclusive focuses on the challenges of the information media and technological landscape. And this can slow down development and change, all right? And this is the part of the challenge that we have faced. So UNESCO offers a conceptual, one conceptual approach to consider you can look at in the next slide very rapidly, and I'm coming to a close. To look at, if we look at a framework, you know, a sort of a frame of this ecology, in the center we have information, media, internet, libraries. You know, these are the modes and the means that we need to communicate, all right? And we could, this is the mode, and we could organize that, next slide, yes. We could look at that at different stages and different layers, all right? Yes, click. We could look at the purpose. What is the purpose of media, information, internet, and libraries? For problem solving, for connecting, for entertainment, for engagement in society. We could look at the understanding that people need to have around knowing the functions of media and internet providers in democratic societies into sustainable development. The ethical use of information, and looking at the process. The third level is the process. What are the skills and competencies people need to critically analyze information and media content, to define and articulate their information needs? Something as simple as that. We go to the internet space very every day, but sometimes we don't think what our information needs. We just allow information to come to us, but we can control that. So it's look at the purpose, process, and understanding and process. And for UNESCO, ICTs or digital skills are cross-cutting. It goes across whether we're talking of purpose, understanding, and process, and it cuts across information, media, and technology. It is ICT that is driving convergence in this field, and that calls for a sort of a multimodal and multiliteracy approach to what we are talking about. And just to end on the last slide, UNESCO has developed what we call the 5 laws of media and information literacy to promote and explain to persons that mail is not acquired at once. It's a long-term process that, again, it is integrated, it cuts across different disciplines, that people, citizens, we're all creators of information and knowledge, and some way, whether we're online or not, we're part of the information ecology. And we try to bring together the different stakeholders in the field. And the 5 laws offer basic principles of what should go into designing, articulating, implementing, and monitoring media and information literacy. And I invite you to see that on the UNESCO website, and I'll stop there for now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alton. It's a hugely ambitious agenda, and I think it's excited many people around the world, especially because, as you say, you link it to Sustainable Development Goals, to the Communication for Development agenda. So, but we need to move on, and I'm just making sure Maria is moving on our slides to, yes, to hear from Ellen.
Yes, hi.
Okay, and yes, Ellen, the floor is yours, and I think the focus is now going to be less literacies, more skills.
Yeah, but skills as embedded in literacy. And I just wanted to thank my colleagues, which again, I know, Sonia, you're looking for debate and discussion, but I think in general, we kind of agree on main principles, right? So okay. I will now do, just as with the introduction slide, just to say that as Sonia already said in the introduction, I am going to be talking mainly from my position as representing 2 global research projects, which try to conceptualize and theorize digital skills as embedded in a broader multimodal landscape of several media, which are the From Digital Skills to Tangible Outcomes project, which focuses actually mostly on on adults, although it also has been applied to young people, and the Y Skills project that Sonia Livingston has already mentioned as well, which is about skills that young people need to basically survive and thrive in the current modern landscape. So if we could go to the next slide. So I'm going to do what previous one, sorry, yeah. So I'm going to do what Alton said UNESCO doesn't want to do, and I'm going to try to put in one sentence a definition of digital literacy, and I'll make the link between literacy and skills in 1 minute. So I will read the definition that we are using in these projects out to you, and then I will explain why I've highlighted some of these, because they say something about how they've been developed, how our understanding has been developed in the field. And the field that I'm also mostly talking from is not just literacy, but it's really from my interest in the links between traditional or historical inequalities and vulnerabilities, and the way that our people are able to engage with ICTs or information and communication technologies. So that's where it's kind of the angle that I'm coming from here. And so the definition is the ability to use ICTs or decide not to use them in ways that allow people to obtain beneficial outcomes and avoid negative outcomes across all domains of everyday life for themselves and others, now and in the future. And I think most of the definitions that we've seen historically in our field have focused on the first, which is a rather narrow technical definition in terms of literacy. It's the ability to use ICTs. Now for us, especially in coming from the field of digital inequalities or digital inclusion, often the emphasis on getting as many people as possible to use ICTs, because there's talk about exclusion in a digital society. But for us, in the way that we approach it, and in my approach, it's very important to also figure out that sometimes the most literate use of technologies is to decide not to use them when actually the benefits are not clear of using them, or they might actually do you harm when you use them. And there might be alternative ways to engage with people and society around you that is not through technologies, but you need to have the knowledge to know when to and when not to use technologies, and the ability. And then the second part, and this is where kind of digital literacy or digital skills fits in, and it links up very nicely what we already heard Tessa and Alton say, is that skills in themselves, or digital literacy in itself, is not important. What is important is that they allow us to obtain beneficial outcomes, to achieve, well-being in our everyday lives, and to avoid these kind of more negative outcomes across all domains. In the work that I do with adults, the emphasis is often on the beneficial outcomes, again, because we often talk there about exclusion. But when we look at the literature and the discussions around young people, the emphasis is often on the avoiding of the negative outcomes. And I think we have always, in all the work that I've done, emphasized that opportunities and risks, or benefits and harm, always come together. We cannot just look at one side of the coin, because they're intrinsically linked. Now then, on the second sentence is this, for themselves and others, is that these skills are not just needed to create a better world for ourselves, to achieve benefits from using technology for ourselves, but also to participate and engage in that digital world in a way that creates a positive collective environment for others as well. And then the very last sentence of this definition, now and in the future, is something that comes more towards the practice of digital literacy, or implementing this into, let's say, digital literacy training programs or digital skills training programs, is that up until very recently, and continuously so in many parts of the world, is that we very much focus on teaching individual skills to use a particular platform or the thing that is happening right there, right now. But that then a new platform comes along, or technologies change very rapidly. We already mentioned in some of these presentations, artificial intelligence or smart devices, and that the skills that we learned in a very particular digital environment don't work anymore in a different environment, or we don't know how to translate them. So this idea of transferable skills, which is very common in the educational literature, actually doesn't really apply here. Okay, so let's move to the next slide, just to give you the context of this digital framework that I'm looking at. So digital literacy is for us the kind of overarching temple in which digital skills are embedded. And when I talk about digital skills, these are the things that we are able to do. So kind of very specific kind of things that we are able to do to achieve these outcomes. we, from our review of the literature, make a distinction between the kind of more technical and operational skills and this kind of information and navigation and processing type skills, and the more what has also been called softer skills, these interaction and communication skills, and these content creation and consumption skills. And up until very recently, it has to be said that especially the digital skills literature has focused very much on the technical and operational and on the information navigation, but less on these softer skills, which are were considered to be less instrumental. As a kind of side note to this, within all of this, in my definition, we make a very clear distinction between the functional skills that are present in all these pillars of skills pillars or skills domains, which are the really applied things to what you can do, and the kind of more critical skills, which are about an understanding of that digital landscape, which my colleagues who have spoken before me have already referred to very much. And a critical understanding, both in terms of how technologies and content is created, but also how we, through our behavior, influence the way in which others are able to participate, or how comfortable and welcome they feel in that digital environment. So let's move to the next slide. And this is the one that's slightly more dense, because this is where it really gets to the theory. And I know Sandra will ask us a few more questions afterwards about this. There's two things in this model that I would really like to point out, which is that distinction between hard skills and soft skills, where in many practice and in the interventions, but also in the literature, often the emphasis is on these harder skills, this kind of really knowledge and ability to execute, button knowledge, or how can we, how can you create a robot, very kind of be high level technical skills, but still kind of the hard skills. And in many interventions in policy and in practice, these kind of softer skills of, and critical understanding and evaluation of the impact that technology has on yourself and others' lives is much more absent or less strongly present. Also because it's harder to teach, because we often see in our research that these softer skills are done through informal learning. It's the things that we get from our home environments, while the harder skills are more easy to put in like a nice little package and then give an exam and see if they know things or can do things. But these softer skills are more collective and collaborative and social. And the irony of it is, or maybe that's the kind of my critique of this as well, is that these soft skills in particular is what we notice in our research are fundamental to translating our engagement in different fields and different types of engagement with technologies into these kinds of well-being outcomes. And that while hard skills obviously are needed, it is actually the softer skills that are really important in making that translation from use to benefits and avoidance of risk. And that it's also, coming back to where I started, in these softer skills that the real inequalities lie between people who have been historically disadvantaged, that there is that there is kind of a resurgence of, for example, inequalities in terms of socioeconomic status, but also sociocultural background, and that this can influence how we translate that. I wanted to finish my presentation by emphasizing that I am also in general critical of the big emphasis, and this is kind of counter my own employment prospects, I guess, but I am a little bit skeptical of the great emphasis on skills or literacy as the be-all and end-all. Because what we keep seeing in our research is that while it is fundamental and essential to have these kinds of skills to survive and to prosper in a digital society, if a society is fundamentally unequal, inherently unequal, then no matter how many skills or what kind of level of skills people have, the outcomes of technology use and the way in which they are designed are unequally distributed. So we need to see these skills and as embedded within these kind of the societies that we live in, and teaching people digital skills in practice is quite hard, but we need to see that they need to be embedded and part of bigger interventions that deal with things like the rights frameworks or inequalities that we have seen occurring up until now. So I think I'll stop there to give time to the other speakers as well to present their point of view.
Thank you very much, Ellen. And I'm going to turn now to Sandra. And as her slide is appearing, I just remind everyone that the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen is where you can ask questions. And Willem Joris is looking out to see what you're going to ask. I'm going to ask people, if possible, in fact, to direct questions generally so that I can invite everyone to respond. And yeah, anyway, Sandra, over to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for hosting us. Actually, contrary to my colleagues here in this session, I would like to start our story more with practice. So my name is Sandra. I lead a research team at the Berkman Klein Center called the Youth and Media Team. I don't do this alone, but with my very dear colleague, Alexa Hassi and Urs Gasser. And so while our primary goal is to do research at Youth and Media, whenever we do research, and you, next slide, thank you so much. Whenever we do research, we then, at the end of that research process, we translate that research into educational content. You may call this learning activities or educational resources, whatever the term is that you prefer. While we are a US-based entity, much of our focus is global, and particularly also the Global South, and more prominently also Latin America. We host with UNICEF together a network called Conectados al Sur, so a lot of this effort is done in conjunction with partners around the world. All the content we produce is open access, which I think is important as well. We don't sell this educational content. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I would say about 2016, we basically as a team, we paused and said, okay, what we have online on this platform called the Digital Citizenship Plus resource platform, all this content we have, if we would give that to an educator or to a young student about all these different areas that we are addressing, would we set up a student for success? Would the student be able, through our content, learn everything they need in order to be successful, thrive in this digital world? So that was basically where we started. So very much on the ground, developing the actual content that many colleagues talk about as a very conceptual framework. And so about the same time, several states in the US here started to either draft or pass legislation telling schools essentially what they should teach. And in that legislation, they use the term digital citizenship. So it's not a term I'm particularly fond of, and we explain also in the report why we're hesitant, for instance, to use this term. But that was basically the premise, looking around us, saying what are schools required to teach, but we also looked at other learning spaces and start from there. As Tessa was saying, you need kind of a conceptual base to compare things against. And so what started as an internal exploration, an internal memo, then turned into this 100 pages report that you can access online through that link. So next slide, please. So what we then did over the course of many months is we looked globally at what others that have created concepts of digital citizenship, what they say that entails. And we ended up with like a big collection of terms, concepts, areas, I would say somewhere around 50, that through a lengthy process in collaboration with young people and experts in the field, we managed to cluster into 17 areas, which you see on the right side. You see those are thematic areas, and I will explain in a second why that is the case. Based on those 17 areas that we then had, we went back to all the frameworks that others were talking about and basically studied who is addressing what. And if we look at the content that we have already there, do we in our content have significant gaps? And if someone is addressing those gaps, can we take that as an example or as a as a starting point to then create additional content. What we realized when we did this exploration is obviously that there are so many parallel concepts. And if you look particularly at Europe, the term digital citizenship, or like we call it now, digital citizenship plus, is not very common. It's primarily outside of Europe that that term is used. And so we said, well, we work very closely with entities like UNESCO, OECD, you name it. And so maybe we should look also at whatever they call it, and basically include that in our mapping exercise. So you see on the left side, you see at the top, you see all the entities that call it digital citizenship, and then basically what these entities address or think should be addressed. And at the bottom, all these other entities that use other concepts or other terms and what they, in essence, address. In sum, because I know I'm already a little bit over time, you can say it's essentially very messy. So we use the same term but address different areas, or we are addressing the same areas but are using different terms. And so what you call it says likely more about you and the organization and where the organization is based than what the concept is addressing. And lastly, very sadly, actually, if you look at the last column there in teal, very few organizations involve young people in the decisions about these concepts and what they should entail. And maybe because I started with the emphasis on Latin America, just minor thing, for instance, there are terms we are using, such as literacy and competency, that in other languages around the world, such as Spanish, for instance, just simply don't exist. So the question, we have workarounds and we use other terms, but if you use a concept and you call it something, in our case, we want to make sure other people around the world can equally as well use it. So you see there are 17 categories very quickly. Digital is basically one of it. Media is another one. We removed the literacies, and I'm happy to explain why. Last slide. So now we have these 17 areas and this concept in mind, but actually what we care most about is, again, how do we translate that into practice and how can the different stakeholders contribute to this effort? Because what we know is that no one entity can solve this problem alone. So it can't be the schools that now are teaching 17 new areas. It can't be the home environments that are going to address this. It needs to be an effort across all stakeholders. We need to account for the different spaces where learning is actually happening. So that's number 2. We need to involve theories such as connected learning into all of this. 3, others mentioned it already, we need to make sure we can reduce inequalities and gaps, not create new ones by creating, for instance, binary systems and things like that. And while this is focused on young people, at Youth and Media, we do think this is lifelong learning. And I think that's a feature in another book. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sandra. And I think your one of your many great points, but what the point about language is really important, because I've been in meetings where it's been said, sometimes by frustrated policymakers, that because the community doesn't agree on the word by which we label what we're all talking about, somehow there isn't really any substance to the field, or indeed any importance to the issues that arise. And as you rightly say, the words are so different in different contexts, for different histories, different languages and so forth. But actually, I think, as Ellen said, the commonalities across the speakers and I think a sense of shared understanding and commitment has, for me, emerged very, very strongly. So I'm going to ask Willem in a minute to kind of give us a sense of what questions are coming up, and then perhaps ask one or two that people can pitch in on. But while he's thinking about that, I would just love to ask you, I feel even though we put youth and children and young people up there in the title, I haven't heard very much about them. And I think we have heard a lot about what does apply to the whole population. So I would just love some thoughts it doesn't have to be from all of you, but what is specific then about media information literacy skills in relation to children and young people? And I don't know if Tessa, you want to kick off? And you're muted, I think. If you just want to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I would say that in our experience, children and youth absolutely enjoy media literacy. And I think that that's an important aspect, because education should be enjoyable. It should be something that's engaging for children, and children are very curious about the media world. And so it's a wonderful way to engage young people, and not only engage them in, you know, kind of the learning, but also in the expression and the opportunities they have for expression. So I think that they can learn a lot about their peers, about their community. It's collaborative learning, and these are all very important skills for children to acquire. So because it's such a kind of democratic approach to education, I think that there's resistance to that on the part of some educators, and I've definitely seen it. And
I would agree. I mean, I think especially in relation to some of the critical and inquiry focus that you made. Sandra, you mentioned in your, I know in your work you consult with young people a lot. I wonder if they would have something kind of distinctive to bring into this discussion. I know this is a lot of adults talking about them.
So obviously digital technologies are such an essential part of young people's lives. So as Ellen was saying, skills are not the end, it's not the only thing that we should be talking about, but it is an essential part of what young people should be available to possess or be equipped with. And so in our case, we co-design all our content because we realized that young people have as much to contribute to the substance itself than, for instance, us educators may have, and they may have other areas that they want to learn more about that we didn't even think about. And so part of our mapping in these 17 areas really involved young people in figuring out, are those 17 really what you want to learn more about? Or is it just what we are imposing on you? And so that's why I think it's essential to include them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, brilliant. Ellen, you look like you, yes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Ellen, and then Alton.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we'll go to the.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to jump in there with just, I think, what, you know, because my work does span the generation, and I see the very different discussions that go on in these, you know, relation to adults and relation to young people. And I think one of the things that in the work with young people keeps coming out for when we talk to young people themselves as well, is that they still, let's call, you know, suffer a little bit under the perception that they know everything, you know, this myth of the digital native. And I think this is something that's hindered some of our interventions and some of the ways in which we look at this as kind of all adults working in this field. And that this is, you know, there's a kind of a real cry for help, and that we sometimes assume that they know things that they don't know, or assume that they need to be taught certain things that actually is not that relevant. Because I think for them, as Tessa was also saying, and Sandra hinted at just now, is this is very much part of their everyday lives. So it's very much they want to acquire skills or literacy that that is relevant right here, right now, but they understand that it also has implications for their future. And so I think it's about digital skills not being just tied to education or how to use a certain device, but really how does it allow me to, you know, have better relationships with my friends. And they see around them that things are going wrong and they don't really know why, and then adults assume that they know because they're good at pushing buttons. So I think this is something that we really need to think about as that embedding, you know, into their relevance for their everyday life.
Right, it's a great point. And Alton, in a way, one of the interesting things about the UNESCO approach is that you don't just focus on children and young people, you really do promote media and information literacy for the whole life course. But I wonder if you want to say something specific about the interests of children.
Yeah, so if you permit me, Professor Livingston, I'll just respond with 3 quick panels, all right, in respect to this particular question. It's important. We have 70% of youth worldwide who are online, according to ITU statistics. And the first panel I want to address from a UNESCO standpoint is that we have carried out extensive research on how young people respond to media and information literacy competencies. How do they engage in social and democratic discourses after having acquired media and information literacy competencies? And these social and democratic discourses issues include, privacy, quality media, gender equality, exposures to online radical content and hate content, freedom of expression, access to information, and things like that. And what we have found is that young people, they're not dupes. They do have some prior knowledge about media and information literacy that they have acquired from prior learning. All right. What we also learned from the research is that they want to be engaged in this. They're excited about media and information literacy. They're excited about the inquiry, asking questions. That's what young people like to do. That's what children like to do. It's that spirit of inquiry. I have a son who is 7 years old, and he asks me why 100 times per day, But because I'm a media and information literate person, and my wife has acquired that, I'm sorry, she's married to a husband who is also a media. We answer every question. We never let a why go by without answering. So we're nurturing that inquiry for children. So when he grows, he's going to be a part of that, So what we learned from the research is that young people, in fact, they do learn news competencies, and they do change how they see the world and how they engage when they acquire these competencies. This is what we have learned from the research.
Okay, that's a really great point, and I think actually it's coming across from all the contributors that there is an enthusiasm to learn from young people, and they feel, yes, this is their world. In the interest of time,
I want to give a quick second panel, if you permit me. I'll be short because I know I talk too much. But just a second panel, I'll not go to the third. But the second one is that we need to engage young people not only as beneficiaries of media and information literacy competencies or digital competencies. We need to engage them as co-creators and co-leaders in developing media and information literacy. They are the next generation of this work, and UNESCO is doing that. All right. We have developed, as a part of the Global Alliance that Tessa is a part of, we have a youth committee, and it's the most active committee in the entire Global Alliance, and they're doing wonderful things across the world. And there are young people who are listening. Please go to the UNESCO website and find the Global Alliance or Partnerships Youth Committee. Also go and find our work with MilClicks. MilClicks, we're trying to promote peer education, youth peer education about male online, on social media. In a creative and innovative way. So there are many things that we're trying to do to engage youth, leaders, and youth organizations.
Okay, thank you, brilliant. I'm going to turn to Willem now, who's been keeping his eye on all the questions. And Willem, if you can give us a flavor of thoughts and responses from the participants listening in, and do direct any questions to the speakers.
Okay, it was a very lively debate. Thank you for that. And also thank you very much for all the questions from the audience. There were a lot of interesting questions. Some of the questions were already solved and answered in the debate later on. For example, the relationship between adults and the youth. It was mentioned also by Ellen. Our audience is very diverse, so there are questions from people with a background in education, of policy, or academia. One question that came across was, what engagement would you like to see from the policymakers to promote or support media and digital literacy? It's a question that came across a few times. So maybe some panelists can give some policy recommendation or recommendations for practice, educational practitioners. So that's an important question I would like to bring on the table.
Thank you. Okay, so we are academics, practitioners, I think I'm not sure, yes, civil society, not so much policymakers. So what do we want from the policy world to promote this agenda? Ellen, are you looking that you might go first there?
Yeah, I'm not a policymaker, but I do engage a lot with policymakers. So I've actually had this debate quite a few times. I think just to follow up a little bit on what we were, all of us were saying and contributing just now around, young people being very excited about this, if we're putting this in the context of young people. I think a lot of the policy is still very much focused on a certain type of well-being, if we think about it. Less steered from the bottom up, from what people and children really want and need in some ways, but in these times that we live in, very much about what does the economy need. So we see a lot of programs focused on what I might call creating good workers in digital societies, teaching them how to program, teaching them how to do these things, without seeing this as embedded in a wider environment, which we've all agreed on is very necessary. So if I would have one recommendation to policymakers, is to go out and see what are the most pressing issues that citizens are facing, if we also position this within the citizenship rather than just employability, which is where this debate often takes place, and really think about what are the key areas where people are currently suffering, where there's need. Go to the organizations that are working in these areas, rather than seeing the digital as a standalone thing and bring it in as this is a digital intervention program or this is a media intervention program. These are things that are embedded within these broader issues that we're facing in society right now. And there's actually a lot of organizations, and UNESCO is a very good example of this, but at the local level, who are working with problems and issues that we're facing. So my first recommendation really to policymakers is to not start with the digital, but to see how the digital can be embedded within interventions where there's a lot of knowledge and expertise already. And not think about it only as an education, formal education thing, as courses, as degrees, but as embedded, as Sandra was saying, in family life, in club life, in church, religious organizations. This is really.
I completely agree, though I wouldn't want to give up on the departments of education.
No, they are part of this, but yeah, I think sometimes focuses too much on those things at the expense of all the other other stakeholders that we have talked about that are involved in.
Willem, did you want to bring in another question at this point? Because I think if I ask everyone to answer all questions, we will be here a while. Yeah, even though they have great answers. Yeah.
Sorry, another question that came across a few times was the influence of current actions, the current things that happens, like polarization or the COVID-19 pandemic. Has this an influence on digital skills or about on the agenda on digital skills? Is one of the panelists can answer that question?
Tessa.
If you want.
I think Tessa was going, yes, okay.
To my knowledge, this is being addressed. Unfortunately, there's always a lag between identifying the need and having policymakers and government agencies organize toward solving whatever problem is at hand. So in the case of COVID, for example, I know that the US government is definitely issuing RFPs around that. And I'm delighted to say that media literacy is being included as an important part of looking at these problems. And that's a huge development because in the past, media literacy was never included. So I think that, there are definitely efforts being made, and I think we'll be seeing the results of some of that over the next few years. But, it's a slow process. And of course, that's the frustrating part that we all have to recognize, is that it takes time. The research doesn't happen overnight.
I agree, though. I've been impressed at how rapidly the research community has generated knowledge, particularly about misinformation and disinformation, which oddly, sadly, has really put media literacy back on the agenda. Yeah. Willem, do you want to take us to what I think might be a last question?
Yes, I'm not muted. So a last question maybe is that, do you have any good examples on how to involve parents and support them in supporting their children?
Parents. Alton, does UNESCO have an agenda for parents?
Yes, we have an agenda for parents, an agenda for COVID, and an agenda for policy.
I thought you might.
And so I invite the viewers to go to our website and see these guidelines. It's a complete guidelines for policymakers on developing national media and information literacy policies and how to integrate this with the development objectives at the national level and linking that to SDGs, not just in a context. And one of the development objectives that we're facing right now is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still with us. It is pushing almost everyone online. Teachers didn't know how to use Zoom, now have to learn how to use Zoom. My son was doing classes all day from 9 until 4:30 on Zoom and several different platforms. I'm forgetting the names because he was using a different one for different class, for French class, for English class, for Chinese. He was using different platforms. And so this has implications. Both the hard skills that I believe Helen spoke about earlier, but the soft skills, because then the more young people engage with the technology, the more they're exposed, and then they need to have those critical compasses. You know, for parents, we have developed what we call MIL parenting, media and information literacy parenting, and that is developing resources that will help parents to know what to do and how to do it with their children at home as they engage more with technology, with media, with information because of social distancing. That is a requirement in responding to the pandemic. So go to our website. The time is short, but if you go to our website, you'll see a lot on what we do with MIL parenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alton. And Sandra, yes, parents. We talk a lot about. They're not so fashionable as young people, though.
Well, maybe just two additions, since you can't do it as the moderator yourself. One is for the questions that I didn't get to answer that are there addressed to me, please send them to me directly. I will do my best to answer them. But what I was going to say is Sonia's book for parents and about parents and parenting coming out very soon. So I highly encourage you to read that. The same, in same vein, Urs Gasser and John Palfrey are releasing a book for parents and about parenting. Same with the executive director of ISTE here in the US, a parent's book about skills that is coming out very soon as well. So take a look at those. And then together with the Digitally Connected Network, we are about to launch a call for educators, families, people in this field to create activities for families. So we have created an initial set that we're happy to share with families. So that enable mutual learning from each other, but hopefully many others like all of you here, the 200 and so forth people will contribute to that. So then we have a whole ecosystem of things family can do and support each other.
Brilliant, because it is, as is often said, this really is a multi-stakeholder challenge, and we need the parents, the educators, the policymakers. We haven't said much about industry, so maybe we're going to need another webinar on industry, not to, because in fact they of course are also producing resources, but they also produce some of the challenges for media literacy. So there is going to be scope for many more webinars to come in these curious times that we're living in. I want to thank everyone for bearing with us as I decided we would overrun a little because the conversation was so rich, and I'm sure everyone will feel as I do there was a lot more that could be said. So this is a conversation that's ongoing, and from our part we will tidy the start and end a little of the video and put it online on the core website very soon. But I'm just conscious of all the questions that have been coming up. We will, in the coming time, collect the questions and perhaps come back to our wonderful speakers and collect some of the resources that they're sharing so that we can put those together as a resource, because it's a very well-resourced area in one sense, and yet there is a continued struggle to get the resources to the people that really need it. And there are all kinds of ways in which we don't quite come together as the global movement actually that Tessa described us as at the start. So looking at some of the names of those who are on this webinar, I can see that the community does know that it is here, and people are collecting at these points where these crucial issues are being discussed. So from that point of view, I'm enormously encouraged. So when I meet some policymakers, I'm a little less encouraged sometimes. We will be holding more webinars in the future, but for now, I want to say thank you so much to our fabulous speakers, to Tessa, Ellen, Alton, Sandra, to Willem for collecting the questions and putting them to us, for Maria, who's working very hard behind the scenes to make sure that this is a media literate production, as it were, and to the European Commission for funding the work. So thank you very much, and we will be in touch with our updates and resources.